From Reuters today, U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin on Wednesday reiterated the United States' ironclad support for Israel's right to defend itself in a call with Israeli counterparts, the Pentagon said. Secretary Austin conveyed the department's ironclad support for Israelis' legitimate right to defend itself and its people, and he strongly condemned the launching of rockets by Hamas and other terrorist groups. Pentagon spokesman John Kirby said in a statement. Meanwhile, Austin reiterated the importance of all involved parties to take steps to restore calm. Meanwhile, the reality is much more complicated. 53 people, including 14 children, were killed in the Israeli bombardment that Austin failed to mention yesterday. According to the Gaza Health Ministry in last night's attacks from the Israeli military. In total, more than 200 people have been wounded in Israel, while there have been more than 300 Palestinians injured, according to authorities on both sides. It is the most intense exchange of fire since the 2014 war in Gaza, as both sides appear to be prepping for more violence. The American military, the legacy media here in the United States, has been completely one sided, for the exception of maybe CNN International, who actually interviewed a Palestinian and asked for his experiences that he was going through the night as the Israeli military was bombarding south of the Gaza Strip. And as well as today, this morning, Israeli military airstrikes, white phosphorus used to deploy and disseminate Palestinians from throwing rocks and shooting off handmade rockets into Tel Aviv. White phosphorus is actually an outlawed substance from the International Criminal Court, for which Israel and the United States are not a part of. And the reason why is so that both countries can get away with the most egregious war crimes imaginable. They continue not just here in Israel, but throughout the Middle East as well. Um, this is the problem that we're facing today: is the continued oppression of the poor peoples of the Middle East, not just the Palestinians, but to Shiite minority. It seems that the Arab leadership of the Gulf, led by uh, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and his relationship, a tentative relationship with the Israeli government, and his strong ties to the United States government. Doesn't matter whether they're Democrat or Republic, there is no polarizing left and right diatribe when it comes to foreign policy. They act as one singular unit. Most of them do anyway. And that's because there are many interests regarding the Middle East. One of them being, of course, fossil fuels. Second being the intelligence apparatuses regarding the Five Eyes community, led by the signals intelligence community, as well as military expansionism and the continued um, oppression of the economically deprived poor people of the world. This is also an economic war, um, rich versus poor. Here in the States, we are unfortunately too lackadaisical mentally to understand that that is exactly how they control us here, uh, by making sure we remain ignorant and dependent on the federal government instead of acting as a um, self aware, healthy unit where we can protest certain illegal acts by our government and as well as foreign governments who have interests here in the States. Uh, as you can see, Secretary of Defense Austin failed to mention the crimes made by the Israeli military, headed by the far right Likud Party nationalist government. Um, do not, I say as a warning, do not make sure, do not make this a anti-Semitic trope of yours for those people who want to hide behind the anti-Zionist flag. Meanwhile, you're anti-Jew. Um, you're actually not helping the cause. You're just being very disingenuous about it. This is the high time where the American public has to stand up for an oppressed minority, whether it be here or elsewhere, because it does involve us, because most of the military armaments from Israel come from the United States. And this is where we as a people have to put an end to the continued debasement and complete subjugation of a peoples. As I'm not forgetting that there are radical fundamentalists who are taking this event for their own agendas as well. You have the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, you have Hamas. These are ultra Orthodox, radical fundamentalist groups who have no care for the Palestinian people. They just use them to achieve a nefarious means. And that is the continued conflict between their hatred for Jewish people in general, and at the same time, the nationalist military led by the far right Likud party, headed under Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who is also not just a human rights violator, but also a war criminal. Um, there are faults on both sides, but however, Palestinians are not using a military. They don't have a military. They're not the ones whose houses are being bulldozed. They're not the ones whose land is being razed. They're not the ones living in encampments cordoned off, and they're not the ones being subjugated by a domestic military that is coming from the Israeli government. Um, but we need honest people to speak out and to repeat the message of stop the continued subjugation of the Palestinian people.